forward to it each and every week. Look at him just smiling. He's just a ray of sunshine. This is the happiest, nicest guy in the world. He's with us each and every week on the Emerald Queen Casino Sportsbook Hotline. Our buddy Jon Morosi is here. How are you, man?
Bob and Dave, I am outstanding. I'll actually get a couple days in Arizona later on this week. Unfortunately, I'm going to miss overlapping with you guys by about 24 hours. But I assure you, I will leave Arizona with beautiful weather. And all the spring training optimism is going to be left behind for all of you when you arrive next week.
Yeah, well, that's I guess it's a close second to having you there in person. It'd be better if you were there in person, but we'll go with that. We'll go with that. Hey, we heard from Justin Hollander through the week. Our morning show is out there talking to guys, and Hollander talked about. I'm curious how much you put into what we saw from this team in the final 34 games under Dan and Edgar. It feels like, to me, I feel like people are putting too much into it, like it was this drastic 180 and everything was different. And Hollander kind of said, he dug his heels in a bit and said, no, our philosophy hasn't changed. Our approach hasn't changed. The messaging is kind of what's changed. But to your eye, did it look dramatically different to you?
It did. It looked a little bit livelier, and I certainly think that having a Rosarena there and Robles there helped activate that energy a little bit. I do think that this team, and certainly having Polanco healthy at the end of the year, which spins forward towards his return this season, and what they hope is a continuation of the very end of last season into what 2025 could bring. I do believe that the Mariners were a more talented offensive team than they appeared on the field for so much of the year. Especially, we've talked a lot about some of those crucial series that went against them late in the year. That, to me, told the tale for this team and why they got to that frustrating point of just barely missing the playoffs yet again. So it's a matter of getting 5 to 10% better with guys that we already know are very good hitters. And we've talked a lot about Julio, and I'm sure we will throughout the season, but 10% better of Mitch Garver, 10% better of Mitch Haniger will I think potentially render a huge dividends for this team going forward. And I think that there's a reason why the Mariners wanted to have Edgar as part of the foundation of the hitting philosophy, and just that credibility of having a Hall of Famer deliver messages to you is pretty unique, and not a lot of teams have that, and that is now a competitive advantage the Mariners believe that they have.
So, the way we were wording it, who's the most important player, or the biggest, most, I would say, notable what if, as far as outside of Julio, because I feel like Julio he's hands down the one guy that if he's consistently good, it's going to do your team a ton of good. But outside of that, what do you think is the biggest priority? What player needs to step up the most?
I'll say Mitch Garver, and the reason is that while you could make an argument for any number of players, Garver was brought in a year ago to be a middle-of-the-order bat to effectively form the foundation, if not the foundation, then the middle or the heart of the order, the fulcrum, if you will, to be there with Polanco alongside what Cal Raleigh does, and certainly Julio, and it just didn't happen in year one. Did not happen. And for a team that we have seen this year not really be able to invest much in free agency, you do not have the luxury of missing. There are some teams that can swing and miss on a free agent and it doesn't really sting you. In this case, you need him to provide that thump, because there's not a lot of players in the organization. The pipeline, they do have some prospects on the way. We've talked about Emerson and Young, and Ford is another name certainly, but there's not really, to this point, a bat that we would say is a corner power, put him down for 80 to 85 RBI and even 15 to 20 home runs right now in the big leagues. They don't really have a player like that. And so as a result, in my view, Garver provides something that they do not readily have available to them elsewhere in the organization. And for that reason, I think he does present a really important dynamic and spot in that lineup for 2025.
Hey, we played some cuts from Cal Raleigh and Logan Gilbert earlier, talking about the potential of free agency. And Cal in particular was asked, is it important for you to get to free agency and see what your value is? And he said, no. He'd be very open to signing an extension prior to that. And Logan Gilbert basically said the same thing. He did say, free agency is the gold standard, and players want to get there and see what their market value is, but also indicated he'd be very open to signing an extension here. So, to me, that puts pressure on the organization. They verbalize, hey, no, I don't need to be a free agent. I love it here. I'd like to remain here. And that puts the ball in Seattle's court. How do you see that playing out in terms of what they may command? What's a realistic situation for each financially speaking? And if you believe the Mariners are going to step up and take them up on that and not allow them to reach free agency?
It's getting to be decision time. And it's maybe not urgent yet, but it is amazing in this sport how quickly you go from seeming, well, we've got a couple years and they're still in their arbitration years, we've got some time to figure this out, to it all of a sudden being too late. And in my view, with very few exceptions, the sweet spot to get that deal done is 2 years away from free agency, if not sooner. And that time horizon is rapidly approaching for a number of the Mariners' core players. So at the end of the day, and we'll see what the economic system of this sport ends up being once 2027 rolls around, which there's a lot of questions about what that's going to be. But the one thing that I know is true today and will be true in 10 years and 20 years down the line is that the most cost-effective money that you spend is extending your own really good players and finding that common ground on the first major deal of their career. And it doesn't have to be as big as Julio's deal for it to be a smart deal. You think about all the times that during Ichiro's prime he wanted to stay and was able to find different ways to renegotiate deals, and he's obviously a unique case. But the idea is when you've got someone special and he's part of your future, don't wait around. Get it done. Because like the Toronto Blue Jays have just realized with Vladdy, it's only going to get more expensive to the point where, in this case, it got to be prohibitive, and he's going to free agency in all likelihood, and it's probably not going to be back in Toronto next season. And so you go from having time and leverage to very little of both. And so for that reason, it's fair, in my opinion, for Mariner fans to look at the front office and say, listen, not signing Juan Soto is a defensible position. Okay, there's not a lot of teams that can spend $700 million plus for either Ohtani or Soto. I get it. That's a very high echelon of investment. But making a very logical extension for a Kirby or a Gilbert or a Raleigh for the right player, Mariner fans should expect their front office and their ownership to do that. They should, because that is what good organizations do. There are plenty of cases of smaller market teams. I remember I was in spring training in Bradenton, Florida, the day that the Pirates signed Andrew McCutchen long-term, and certainly the market has moved in the years since then, but that is something the Mariners should be able to do. And so it's fair for the fans to expect that.
Yeah, and it is expected, right? I mean, I don't think anybody's going to say that makes up for, the lack of activity in the off season, right? I mean, it's just that's something that they're not going to get any credit for or any favor from the fans.
Right. It should be the way that good franchises operate. And the Kansas City Royals don't exactly play in a large market in the U.S., and they signed Bobby Witt Jr. to a massive deal, somewhat similar a little bit to Julio. I believe that his AAV is even higher for Witt than it was for Julio. You look around, they brought in and kept Seth Lugo. They brought in and they've kept Waka. They've signed other of their key younger players to extensions. So that's the smart money. The smart money is getting that deal done before it becomes urgent, because at some point, and this is the uncomfortable part for Mariner fans to think about this, at some point, if you can't sign them, the prudent thing becomes to trade them. Now, I'm not saying that they will do that, but that's what the market dynamics would suggest. And it's not as though Jerry DiPoto's ever had to be convinced that a trade is the right course throughout his career. So we are approaching a time where, for a lot of these key guys, a fast start to the season is paramount for us to not be sitting here in July or even June and having conversations about what the Mariners may have to do to reboot things if they get off to a poor start.
Hey, one of the things that we've heard a lot of the players commenting on is the philosophy of Dan Wilson and basically saying, hey, every game means as much as the next game. 162 games, you've missed the postseason by a game each of the past 2 seasons. So you got to attack each game. You can't look at it and say, well, we got 100 left, we're fine. That's the mentality. And we heard Bryce Miller talking about it it sort of annoyed him to hear players talking about, that it's early. He doesn't want to hear it's early anymore. So I like that mentality. But how tough is it, do you think, from a manager standpoint, to keep that team up when you're in the dog days of summer and it's game 83 and you're still looking, going, man, we got 80 games left or almost 80 games left. I mean, how tough is it to, you think, establish that throughout an entire season?
Well, that's what separates the good teams from the bad teams, and then it separates the great teams from the merely good teams, is that mentality and that expectation. I'm fortunate in the job that I have that I get a chance to spend some time around the Dodgers and spend some time around the Yankees, and I know that when I'm at Dodger Stadium, if I want to stop in and say hello to Mookie or Freddie, I get outside at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, maybe 2:30, and they're out there doing early work. That's why they are who they are. And Aaron Judge is a worker. You go down the list of the teams that are there every year, and they have guys who work. And that has to become the idea. Baseball's an interesting sport because you know that even the great teams, and there were no 100-win teams in the sport last year. So that means all the teams lost at least 62 games last year. You're going to lose a lot of games. And Jim Leyland, from a managing perspective, and I'm sure Dan he already knows this, but he'll live it over the full 162 this season. Jim Leyland always said something that had stood out to me, and I've never forgotten it. He said, you cannot be afraid to lose a game. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't care about losing a game, but the way that you manage your team means that at some point in the 162 that you can't, like Andres Munoz can't throw 162 games, okay? So you need to be able to trust and to build in trust for the rest of your depth. And on a Sunday day game when your main guys are all tired and you got to rest and you got to play your energy lineup on the Sunday day game and get your athleticism out there, you need to trust those guys and keep that group mentally engaged so that way they give you a wonderful effort on that Sunday when you need them. And that is the art of managing. It's probably more challenging now than ever before because, honestly, you've got more information about who you should play in a certain situation. Your front office is telling you, oh, this is a really good matchup. He hits breaking balls well, and this is a breaking ball staff. And the manager might say, yes, I understand all of that, but he just fouled a ball off his foot 2 days ago. He's still hurting, and he's not going to give you the best effort today. We need to have somebody else in there. And that's the day-to-day of why this game is so much fun for us to talk about and why it's so difficult to manage. And Dan, it feels like we know how he's going to manage this team to a greater extent than we actually do because he's just been so ubiquitous around Seattle for 3 decades, basically. And it feels like he's everybody's neighbor, that no matter where you live in Seattle, it feels like he could be across the fence from you. You could be talking about how nice his lawn is. That's just Dan Wilson. So I think that there's, on some level, there's that comfort level that he has, that there's a trust that the fans will have in Dan Wilson. Now, certainly results will tell the tale ultimately, but I do think that that's the right approach to take, especially when you consider how narrowly they've missed the playoffs on numerous occasions in recent years. So if there's any team that is going to heed the advice of take every day as being precious, it is this one. But you also cannot let any individual result bleed over into the next day. And good teams, and I'm again fortunate that I've covered a handful of them over the years. Good teams handle losing in baseball well, and by that I mean they don't panic after a loss because they're so confident that they're going to win tomorrow. That they can process a defeat. They can say, yeah, we weren't good enough today. We made some mistakes. We missed some pitches, missed some locations, missed a bunt sign, but we understand why we lost, and it's not going to happen tomorrow. And then they go out and win the game tomorrow. And I think, too, that with this Mariner team, at times they have allowed, and we've all watched this, they've allowed one bad game turn into one bad series, turn into one bad week, and there's your season when you're missing the playoffs by a game. And so I think that message will resonate very well with this team and with this fan base, too.
JP, we were just looking at you mentioned the Dodgers, their rotation. They have one left-handed pitcher in there, I think 4 right-handed pitchers. Then Mariners, all right-handed pitchers. What's the typical makeup, and is that the one sort of nitpicky thing that you would say, it could be a little bit better if they had more left-handed pitching, or is that kind of a formula that teams are looking for?
It's a good question. I think that thinking has changed a bit over time, and partially it's because of the advent of a lot of pitchers who become somewhat platoon split neutral or less dependent on it, where for a long time you would have these lefties with the big lefties sweeping breaking ball, and that was what was common, or more of like the teardrop curve or a slider, more of a classic slider. And I just think that whether it's a more of a power curveball or different secondary pitches that stand out, or the splinker, sweeper, whatever you want to call it, just different modes of pitching have really created more pitchers who are split neutral. And especially with the stuff of someone like a Miller or a Kirby, Gilbert, obviously Castillo, they've all got elite stuff. But depending on the circumstances, they all have different pitches of the secondary variety that make them effective against lefties. So I think for this particular staff, it's not a big concern. If you were bringing out more average stuff, then it would be more of a concern in terms of the platoon splits. But for me, with what this group has and the equipment that they possess, the lack of a lefty starter does not really stand out to me as being a major issue. Now, if you run up against Houston in the playoffs and you want to have somebody that's going to be able to get Alvarez out late or in a big series, I mean, you start to think about that kind of thing. But I think over the big 162, the focus is more just how do I have the best starting 5, and this group I think does a very good job against left-handed hitters as well.
We tried that with Robbie Ray coming out of the bullpen. It didn't work.
I remember that. I was there. I saw it. I saw it happen. Unfortunately, I was in the building, as they say, on that particular day in Houston.
Hey, speaking of pitchers, one of the conversations we've been having is about opening day. Who should be the opening day starter for this team? And if everybody's healthy, and the mantra is, hey, 162. Every game 1 matters as much as game 162 matters. We want to win them all. So you are arguably going to throw out your best arm. Should it be Castillo or should it be Logan Gilbert?
I was going through that in my mind, reflecting on that. I would go with Gilbert. I really would, because I think he has earned it. He, to me, seems like he's got a chance to be the cornerstone starter for this team for a long time. I certainly could argue Kirby is that same guy. Miller's the same guy. I mean, they've got just an abundance of excellent young pitchers. But I just look at what Gilbert did last year and believe that he deserves that assignment. Now, we'll see what happens, and certainly the Mariners have any number of different options that would fit that description. Castillo's had that honor before. I think Gilbert's time has arrived, and that would be a nice – and again, that's not going to get the long-term deal done or do anything of a financial perspective that Mariner fans want, but it would be a nice show of a homegrown guy to get the ball on opening day. My pick right now would be Logan Gilbert.
Yeah, we were talking about Bryce Miller and some of the – it's really cool to see guys become professionals because, we were sort of talking about him and – I think maybe it's not fair, but for like most people, if you pick the starting 5, he would probably be number 5 just because of so much, Wu had so many great performances last year, but he sounds entirely different. Like we were reflecting on when he first came in here, this is his 3rd year, he had his hat on inside out. As Bob mentioned, he's put his glove on top of his head, he seemed like a rookie. and now all of a sudden you're hearing from him some things that make him sound like a pro, and it's really cool to see. And maybe he ends up being. It's kind of a fun exercise. I mean, as much as we talk about the offense, I mean, I think every 2 weeks, 3 weeks, we go, okay, who's the number one? And that's,
right.
It's a great problem to have.
It really is, and I'll be honest. Certainly, it's my job to look at all 30 teams and be conversant on them. There are not many other conversations that I could have around the country or in Canada about the hometown team and have anybody say what Dave just said. Like that doesn't happen. That is a very unique circumstance to the Seattle Mariners, and Miller should be confident. That's what a sub-3 ERA over 180 innings will do for a young pitcher. So there's every reason to believe that he could get an opening day assignment too. That is what this team brings, and that's why, again, I know Jerry was criticized, and rightfully so, over certain things that were said, but when a team has this kind of pitching, they should be confident. And there's a reason why whenever we talk about this team in the playoffs, we've said it before, no team wants to face the Mariners in the playoffs because of how good their pitching is. I still think that is true. That will not always be true. There will be a time where either this group gets injured or ages or they're not as effective, and that is no longer said. But right now, that is still very true. That has been true for multiple years now. It is still true right now, and that's why the Mariners, in my view, are on the short list for the teams that begin this year with the most urgency. Yeah, there's urgency in New York. There always is, and there's urgency in L.A. and in Philly and Atlanta, but there's not a ton of road left where this rotation will be this good and this cheap. Good and cheap do not usually go hand in hand in life, and especially not in baseball for very long. So seize the day to the men of the sea and make this happen here in 2025.
Jon, you're the best, man. We look forward to it each and every week. Always appreciate the conversation. Have a great weekend, and look forward to talking to you next week live from spring training. Wish you were out there with us.
I know. I'm going to be so jealous. I'm hoping to at least stop in Peoria. I've got like 48 hours there this weekend, but I got to try to make a detour to make my way over to the Mariner camp. But I'm going to be thinking of you guys when I'm there, and I'll certainly be thinking of you having the conversation next week. So have a great trip there, and look forward to the next conversation.
Leave us a note there in a bottle or something. We'll find it.
Sounds great. I'll leave you my recommendations of all the best places to go in Scottsdale, or more likely for you in the northwest corner of the city there.
Perfect. Thanks, Jon.
Thanks, JP.
All the best, guys. Thank you. Thanks.
There you go. The great Jon Morosi with us.